Hi everyone, in this video we're going to talk about one of the most iconic bottlings of whiskey that is on the market at the moment, and that is the Port Ellen annual releases that were released by Diageo from 2001 to 2017. The Port Ellen Distillery was set up in 1824 and it ran continuously until 1930, when unfortunately it closed its doors. It wasn't until 1967 though that the distillery reopened and then would continue production all the way until the 1980s. Now in that time there were a few big changes. In the 1970s there was a very large maltings established at the distillery, and that was to provide all of the malt for the Port Ellen, the Caol and the Lagavulin distilleries, all Islay distilleries and all owned at the time by United Distillers. Now United Distillers would later become what's known as Diageo today, but it was through various mergers with Guinness and various troubled mergers with other companies, but it's actually owned by Diageo today, and Diageo still own Port Ellen, Lagavulin and Caol on Islay. Now the distillery closed in 1983 and it remains closed until this day. However, in 2017, the year that this final edition from the series was bottled, Diageo announced that they're going to bring back the distillery online, and this is at great expense. It's £35 million their investment, and that's to bring on the Port Ellen distillery and the Brewer distillery back online. Now, to put that into perspective, it sounds like a lot of money, but Diageo also announced that they're going to spend £20 million on a visitor centre alone at the Caol distillery. So it puts everything into perspective a bit there. The annual release series, which started in 2001, ran all the way until 2017, and there were a number of different attributes about this series that make it really interesting for collectors. So first of all, it's a continuous series. It runs from the first edition all the way through till the 17th edition. So there's 17 bottles in total that you can collect as part of this series. Now, every bottling was a limited edition. So on the front of the box here, you can see that it's one of only 6,000 bottles. So every edition, including the 17th edition, was of a limited number. Now, it was a limited number, but the total number of bottles in the series was 83,514 bottles. So this was a huge volume of bottles that were released as part of the series. Now, the first bottle, which is actually not one of the most expensive ones, had 6,000 in the release, and the second release had 12,000 bottles in it. Now the final release, which ironically holds the title for the highest price at auction at just over £3,100, actually had 2,988 bottles in there. So to give you an idea of the volume of whiskey that was involved in this, whiskey in a cask stored in a cask in Scotland evaporates on average 2% a year. So of those 85,000 bottles, there were approximately, they would have needed 400 to 420 casks, taking into account the Angel's share, which would have taken about 45% of the whiskey if you average out the age of the editions between 22 and 37. So over 400 casks were used by Diageo for this series. Now, that's problematic for Diageo. They bottled a huge volume of whiskey, and it was all from the 1978 and 79 vintage. So every bottle that's in this series is either from the 1978 or 79 vintages, and the years don't run consecutively. So the age statements don't run consecutively. So it doesn't go 22, 23, 24. The age statements jump around from 35 to 32 to 37. So it's a bit of an odd series. Now, do Diageo regret bottling all of that very mature whiskey? They probably do now, but the reality of it is that Port Ellen has got to its mythical status that it has today, partially on the back of these bottlings. So yes, they lost over 400 casks of whiskey to go into this series, but one, they've made a decent amount of money, and two, they've brought collectors, they've given a real core and drive for collectors for bottles to collect. Now, to put it into perspective, since Diageo announced that they were closing or reopening the distillery, in 2017, there's been very few official bottlings. In fact, in 2020, I think there was only 4, and one of those was an official Diageo release as part of the Prima and Ultimate series. So in terms of how these bottles perform at auction and as an investment, they're very stable. If you look at the Rare Whiskey 101 index, there is a continued growth in the value of Port Ellen bottlings. And if you compare that to bottlings from the likes of Macallan, for instance, and especially that of Macallan bottles projected they skyrocketed in value until about the year 2018, and at which point prices have stabilised and perhaps corrected themselves. They've not really fallen in value, but most of them have not continued to grow in value. Port Ellen and other distilleries such as Karazawa, the Japanese distillery, if you look at the 2018 mark on the graph, they continue to rise. So because there are so few releases, there's not much bottle flipping going on, and because it's a closed distillery, of course, at the moment, there's not a lot of bottles for people to get their teeth into. So if you're looking to start a whisky investment or a whisky collection, these Port Ellen annual releases are probably one of the best series that you can go to in terms of affordability. They're roughly at auction between £2,000 and £3,000 a bottle at the moment on average. One of the things that we've not looked at yet are the bottles themselves, and we're fortunate enough to have a first edition and a 17th edition here. So the first edition comes in this very standard box, pretty much like any standard bottle of whisky that you would find today. And here it is. It doesn't actually say that it's a first edition on the bottle, because at the time, did they know that this was going to be the first of 17 releases? Perhaps not, but there's nothing really much about its presentation that screams luxury or screams premium. Now, by the time the 17th bottling was released in 2017, we're in this faux leather box. You've got lovely spot UV details on the box, and it's also velvet lined with a little plush cushion on there as well. And obviously you can see the 17th edition there. And it's just a very well presented bottle in line with the price that was being asked for it at the time. If you're looking to buy or start investing in Scotch whisky, then you probably couldn't go wrong buying these Port Ellen annual releases. They're commercial because they're from a closed distillery that when it comes back online, and hopefully in 2021, there's no doubt going to be a surge of popularity from the distillery. This is already an iconic series of bottlings. It's a relatively small series with only 17, so over the years you're going to be able to complete the gaps in the collection and build your own vertical, and that will have more value than just selling the bottles individually. Now, if you've got a bottle of this already, the Port Ellen annual releases, or any bottles of Port Ellen that you're looking to sell and you want a valuation on them or advice on how best to sell them, please get in touch, and all our details are in the section below.